let's talk a little bit about world building. Actually, we'll take a step back and let's talk about animation. So this is the animated workflow. This is sort of like how an animated film is produced. So it goes from writing that take the script to storyboard artists, who then take the boards to visual development. And then they take the designs to previs, which is sort of like blocking out of 3D models. And then the modelers take those rough blockouts and they actually create the final designs, then layout, animation. All this is sort of fuzzy to me because it doesn't really apply to what I do. So I don't know. I can't speak as much to these things, but these two and these this process is broken up into a couple parts: pre-production and production. And the reason I mention that is because it's going to be kind of important to understand the difference a little bit between these. So if you were to Google visual development, you'll probably get a lot of stuff like this. Um, this one's Nathan Fowkes.
Yeah,
Uh,
recent percent roots.
yeah. You get a lot of these big, beautiful moment paintings. Um, we got Marcello Vignali here, and these are good. This is definitely a part of visual development. Um, but there's another part too. So this part of visual development is sometimes called blue sky. That's where, if you know about the studio Blue Sky, that's where they got their name from, really. Um, it is blue sky concept art. It's really like it comes out of it's a term that means anything. Like we sometimes they don't even have a script and they hire artists to be like, we have an idea. Uh, the rough idea is we wanted a movie to take place, or we want to do, a spin-off of Shrek with the cat and it takes place in Spain and or a Spanish type of culture and artists would be hired to make some art for it. Be like, well, here's some art. Here's a beautiful painting about what this film could look like. Um, et cetera, et cetera. And that's where you get some of these big pieces from. And I've only created a very small sample here. And then there's this other part of visual development. And they're both, at most studios, these are both the same job, or they're called the same thing. They're called visual development artists. And the other part of it is production art. So there are some studios that will differentiate like between a biz dev artist and a production artist, but most of them, like the only one that I know of, I think is Illumination, actually has a separate job title for this, Illumination Studios. But for the most part, both of these things are called visual development, but they're two different parts of the production pipeline. So here we have production art, also part of a visual development. This type of art is meant to be informative to the other departments. Uh, what other departments? Modeling, surfacing, the groom department, lighting, story. And that is stuff like this. So here you have callouts, like what do these bricks look like? Here we have these candlesticks. What do these look like? What do they look on a front view? What do they look like on a side view? Um, what is the material of these candles? What's the word I'm like? What's their surface quality? That informs the surfacing department, right? They're a little translucent at top, like light shines through them. Um, you can see these paintings are used a lot to describe the surface quality of these different things, as well as, um, we can get down here, we can get into a few more things. Some things these describe the to the modelers in a bit more detail. Oh, I'm trying to look for like a really good example here. I'll show some examples of my own stuff here in a minute. But yeah, then there's this type of visual development that has to inform the other people down the pipeline. So understanding a little bit about the animation pipeline is going to help you craft a portfolio that makes you marketable, makes you hireable. It's more, and this is something I didn't understand as much when I was in school. And I wish I would have. I think my professors tried, maybe they tried to make me understand it, and I just was too thick. I didn't get it through my skull. But anyway, understanding a little bit about how animated films are produced will help you. It'll help you know what to put in a portfolio and what to focus, because it's different than just making pretty pictures. So your portfolio should have a bit of both. You know, some of these things. And it kind of depends a little bit on what you want to do. If you only want to do this, like if you're a painter and you're like, I'm a painter and I just want to do these big, beautiful paintings, I'm good at that, then maybe just focus on this, you know? But I will say that this kind of stuff is often reserved for some of the best in the industry. So I'm not saying you can't do it. And if you're good, definitely do it. And definitely, work on becoming one of the best in the industry. Do these types of things if that's what you're interested. But I would also suggest, and because this is what I do and what I'm going to teach in this workshop. We're going to do some of this stuff too, but a lot of what we're also going to focus on is this kind of a thing. Like how to build the actual assets that will make up this environment. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. And now when you talk about world building, we'll skip down a little bit. Yeah. So let's take a look here. Actually, yeah. Let's take a look. So visual development, right? It needs to describe what is happening down the line in terms of the animation pipeline. It also should tell a story. So especially when you're talking about those big moment paintings, right? Um, Now it should tell a story. So let's take a look at a few of these. So what's the story here in this guy? Well, it's we got these three little kids sleeping in like some bombs, right? The story to me, I feel like the story here is this guy, there's two parts of him. He's this caring, nurturing individual. He's also um like wacky. He's insane, right? And of course, this is from uh Illumination. This is from Despicable Me. This is
Yeah.
Gru, right? And it shows the two sides of him. Um he's this caring, sweet guy. Also, he's a little bit uh nutty. He's a mad scientist. And that even comes out in his design. But it especially comes out in his design. And this is something that we're going to talk about. This course isn't on character design, but the principles apply. Many of the same principles apply. If you look at Gru's character, his head's a ball, right? And he's got this big, long, sharp, pointy nose. What does that say? He has this passive shape mixed with this very sharp, active shape. This ball, this round shape, smooth, inviting, friendly. This really long, pointy shape, threatening, scary. you know. He's also very top heavy. his whole body is built like a triangle, but a rounded triangle. Uh, and because he has very skinny legs and very big shoulders and this little ball on top, he feels unbalanced, like he's just going to tip over at any moment, right? Like there's thought behind that design. And when it comes to visual development, world building, that kind of same thinking applies. We want to create worlds that tell stories. And we're going to use the tools we have, the tools like shape, um, composition, color, value. All these things are going to help craft the world that we're building. Um, so yeah, let's continue and talk a little bit about that here. So here again, some more concept art for Despicable Me. Same sort of a thing. We got laundry here. We've got um this great kitchen is like this sort of like warm, friendly kitchen, but with these elements of industrial coldness to them. We have like these steel cabinets with like rivets in them, so we're getting a contrasting feeling of uh, this this industrial stark, like a little bit, like it's probably like 30% industrial, um, wait, 90%, or wait, let's 100 minus 30, 70, yeah, 70% friendly, right? So we get the feeling that he's mostly like this caring guy, but he's also got a little bit of edge, or maybe that he's, yeah, that edge is sort of being pushed out by his caring nature, right? Here we also learn from this drawing, this image, that he is um like an inventor, he's like some sort of a scientist or something. I mean, he has these mechanism with these waffle irons on it that something comes out here. I don't know exactly, but we get a sense of the kind of, we got all these, we got a little pulley system here with hangs or with clothes hanging on it. It gives us a sense of who this character is. And we learn about this character not from the character design. All right, we're learning about this
Yeah.
character from the environment design, which is, to me, it's so exciting. It's like once you kind of learn, and I feel like I'm still learning this, learn that the environment is a character, it really frees you up to explore. So there was another one here I was going to show, but I'm not sure where it is. So anyway, and then another thing I wanted to mention too is just the difference between visual development for animation and visual development or concept art for video games. It's the same. There's the same two forks apply, right? Where you have this sort of like blue sky, high concept, and then you have the production art, right? But there's a slight nuance difference, and um and I learned this from Corey Loftus, but that is that in games, everything, it depends a little bit on the game, but the player interacts with most of it, or they at least want to be able to get up and look at it. So everything needs to look pretty cool. In film, it's similar. It still needs to look good, but it doesn't want to distract from the action that's on screen. So that is something to remember. If you, unless what the action on screen, if the action on screen is about the environment or the prop or whatever, make it as cool as you absolutely want, as cool as it can be, because that's what the scene is about. But if you have, a scene that's supposed to be about a character interaction, but in the background you have this really cool looking prop or really, really cool looking thing going on in the background that could distract, then that's not good. So you want to, it's just something to be aware of. Like the difference between these things is really the intention of them. Like, what is the intention? You know, for games, it's to make it look really cool so that a character is like, whoa, look at this world is incredible. You know, I want to go explore that cave or that dungeon, or I want to pick that sword up because it looks so, you know, it looks so bad. In film, it's like the environments need to support the characters. It needs to
Yeah.
not distract from. Yeah, so that's a little bit about sort of the difference between visual development and concept art and production art. When we talk about world building, we're trying to create environments that immerse somebody in this world that you're building, you know, world building. And if you don't put the focus into that, it's not going to feel immersive. You know, it's even if they don't give it their specific intention, they'll notice that the care isn't there, and it'll pull them out of this world that you're trying to create. Even if your characters look amazing, or even if your script, your action is excellent, if those elements aren't there, yeah, then people won't suspend their disbelief, right? They'll have a hard time getting immersed in this world. So I would say a lot of attention. I put in working at Sunrise, I've had to put a lot of attention into items that are going to have like less than a second of screen time. But if they aren't, if that attention and care isn't given to them, it's just going to feel off, you know? Now, there are occasional things that like they don't need as much attention because they really are like far background elements, but they still need, you still need to be like deliberate with the way you design them. So the other question somebody asked, like, how do you go about designing a background? So yeah, let's talk about designing a background. So these are layout notes from Bill Perkins. I have them here and I took pictures of them. So I have these notes for Aladdin. Why don't we talk through these? So when it comes to world building, we've talked a little about the difference between visual development and concept art and production art. In this workshop, we're going to talk a lot about production art, visual development, and also well, style guides, like the rules that help you create these kinds of things. So let's just take a look at this and we'll discuss it. So rough layout, look for ways to lengthen contours and silhouettes. Keep shapes alive by maintaining an overall rhythm, no straight lines. A few well-designed shapes is always better than picky details. So keep it simple, bold, and design it to support the animation, not dominate or distract from it. So this is obviously, this is for a 2D animated feature, but you'll notice here how simple these shapes are. These are very, very simple compositions. But this is what they create. So he's gone from this, right? These very simple, he's taken an image and he's built some shapes on it. And then he's gone to this, he's refined it a little bit. Clean up layout. Silhouetted contours should play off one another, not repeat. Interior space division should work against exterior shapes. So interior space division, what does he mean by that? He's talking about this big shape here, right? This big shape that he's designed. And now inside that shape, he's creating another shape. And he's got these like contrasting elements here. He's got these lines that go up, but there's nothing on top, right? That creates an area of visual duress and visual interest. And then here, can you see my cursor? An
Yeah.
area of, okay,
can see.
great. Oh, perfect. An area of visual rest and visual interest. Boom, right? Rest, interest, rest, interest, rest, interest, rest, detail, rest, detail. And you'll notice another thing here that's important. And these are all things we're going to talk about in this workshop. But another thing very interesting here is this is not a perspective heavy drawing. There are no perspective lines in here. I mean,
Yeah.
he's telling this drawing, or he's creating this space with overlaps, diminishing size of things, scale, right? But he hasn't drawn out some complex perspective grid. He doesn't need to. There are situations when you need to know perspective, and we're going to talk about that in the workshop as well. But there's principles that help you create these types of backgrounds that I feel like a lot of people they don't know or they don't understand, and they think, oh, I need to create these very complex perspective grids so I can do this stuff. But it's you don't need to. So overlaps, right? So what has he done that now? So now he's created value patterns. Here's a sample of a simple tonal breakup by light source. The composition remains simple by locking shadow patterns together to create two simplified areas, in light and that in shadow. This breakup dominates some sequences. So now look at it. He's using light and shadow, or what I call mass and line, to create another level in this composition. So it creates more interesting shapes, and you get a sense of the volume of the form. So I'm trying to answer your question here. It's a big question, and your question is how to make a background, how to go about doing it. And the answer, I mean, that's what we're going to be going on in this workshop, partly in this workshop. But the answer is simplicity and intention in your design, right? Like look at this. It's fairly simple. Everybody here can draw this well already. It's just a matter of thinking about how you're drawing. So here we go. Here's some other rules, right? A passive side, an active side. You see how this tree, see how it's just sort of a long S curve? This one's still sort of a long S curve too, but this is another principle of design. Things have passive sides and active sides. If everything is too, let me pull up my Photoshop here. Create a new document. I'm sure I have these notes somewhere in here, but actually, you know what? I think I just spotted it. Yeah, here we go. These are some of the notes that we're going to be talking about in this class. But let's start here, right? What do we got here? Create a new layer here, pick some color. Good enough. See, this side is passive, right? There's nothing going on. This is just a wooden plank, right? But this side has a slight curve. That's it. This side, on the other hand, it has comes to a point, right? This is what we would call the active side or the passive side, or sometimes we call it, as I have here, we call it the simple side or the complex side. Now you can play these principles off each other in a lot of interesting ways, right? You see here we have a complex side. Here we have a simple side, but now we reverse it. Now we have a complex side. Now we have a simple side. Say you're designing, what does that look like to me? Well, so you're designing a rose. Rather than just haphazardly throwing thorns on the stem, you might think about, creating the basic contour, then be like, all right, active, or complex, passive, right? Well, that's a much better designed rose than if you were to just try and copy something. So the purpose of what we're going to be doing a lot in this class is learning how to analyze things and interpret them. So let's just go ahead and we'll talk through some of these things. So here we have basic shapes, right? We have circles, triangles, squares. And I'm showing this to you guys because we're going to get more in depth into these things individually as we, if you take the workshop. But I want you to kind of understand like what the workshop's going to be teaching and some things to know. So we're going to talk a lot about shapes, right? We got passive shapes. We got active shapes. We got squares, which are very stable shapes. So shapes are used to create mood and a feeling, right? We also have overlap here, right? These important things go together. You're asking how to go about creating a background. First, gather reference. Second, understand shape and overlap, and then play with it, right? Here's a very simple background using overlapping shapes, right? All it is sort of an oval, cut the end off here, right? What could that be? That could be anything. I could put a pathway here. I could create some other interior shapes to turn those into trees, right? And that's not very hard to do. Let's see if I can find that. Let's yeah, let me just show you. Oh, all right, so I got my scene, right? Now I'm not going to draw a complex perspective grid. I'm just going to put my horizon line fairly low. And I'm going to draw some rough lines. I'm not even being very accurate with, are they exactly following going to the vanishing point exactly? They're just basically rough guidelines. Right now I'm going to create some shapes here like I have before. And I'm going to overlap them. That's a huge thing. Overlaps is a huge part of understanding background design, right? Now, I want a space for my character to live. So I want some foreground elements here. I want some background elements. And I kind of want to draw my eye to this area. So I might make these trees taller because I don't want to pull my eye too much up here. So now I have like somewhat of my exterior shapes, right? And one of my interior shapes. Well, what if I start thinking about these things dimensionally? Like a Pringles Lay chip, right? Or a potato chip, right? That's a potato chip. So I showed a potato chip here. Right, let me create some other shapes. That's an interesting shape. I kind of like how this shape plays out. Let's create another potato chip. Potato chips are fun. Now I'm going to add some U shapes in here. Boom. You know, maybe I'll add some smaller shapes to indicate some other kind of foliage. Now, if I were to take that and clean that up, I mean, that could be a fairly strong background. Now, I'm not saying that's the world's best drawing, but I'm saying the design starts on this level. It starts small. It starts with shape. It starts roughly, you know, and then like think small. If it works very small like this, then it'll work bigger. You know, then get into all the fun rendering, the cool, you know, all the cool little stuff that you can do. But think about just these basic shapes, overlapping them. This is used for designing backgrounds. It's used for designing environments. It's used for designing props. These principles, right? Overlaps create depth. Shapes are used to create mood, right? This creates a very friendly mood. What if I were to do the same thing with triangles? Or what if I were to do the same thing with squares? You know, what do I do if I design trees that are like squares and branches that rotate at like 90-degree angles? What mood does that create? You know, it's very geometrical. It's very interesting, very symmetrical, but it's also somewhat unbalanced, right? Because you got this block on top of these little stems. But my point is, like, analyze what you're looking at, break it up into some of these simple shapes. Think about it, how it can be simplified. Let's go down a little further. You can see this is, I believe this is Paul Felix, an amazing artist, incredible artist. If you look at this drawing, if you were just to look at this, you're like, oh my gosh, that's incredible. That's an amazing drawing. I've never seen anything that beautiful in my life, right? And you wouldn't be wrong for saying that. But also, when you break it up, you're like, oh man, these shapes aren't overly complex, are they? They're just well designed, right? He's created these kind of like mountain shapes. And then he's looked at reference of mountains and he's like, the trees and foliage grow up to a point, but then they can't really grow on this rock that is shot out of the ground. You know, it's this rock has erupted from the ground, and with it, it's pulled up the dirt, and the trees and stuff can grow in this dirt, but it doesn't grow on top of this rock, right? He's observed that. He doesn't need to be a geologist to know that. It's just something he looks and he observes. And so what does he do? He designs around that. He's like, all right, well, there's my rock, and there's an interesting shape. I like, so this is where my foliage is. And I want to show depth, so there's a few other rocks, and you know, I want to make it interesting. Maybe I'll cut some shapes out of that, some negative shapes. And you know, maybe I want a path down here. You can see here, the only place that shows any real perspective is that right there. You know, everything else is just these shapes. You know, we have this very dark foreground element, so it shows us that that's coming closer to us. Circles are calming, peaceful, pleasing. However, they keep the eye trapped, right? So that might be what you want. If you want your audience to look here, design a composition like this, right? Everything keeps them looking right here, composition. says this is where you were supposed to look. Don't look over here. Look here. Conversely, what happens if you cut a circle? When you get curves. Curves allow the eye to flow through. Let's create a few overlapping shapes. Let's see what we can do with curves. Boom, 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 boom. Curve, 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 curve. I've created a, how interesting. My eye now flows up to some golden city on a hill, right? All because of this meandering path. And I've done it using what? Shapes and overlaps. I haven't done it using perspective. I haven't done it using rendering. I haven't done it using even detailed drawing. I've created a composition that leads me where I want to look, leads the audience, where it leads me where I want you to look, using very basic tools. And this is where some of the best art comes from. It comes from understanding these basic tools. Most of you, many of you, already draw well enough, you know, but it's designing, it's thinking about these things as you draw. It's employing the skill set that you already have in a new way. So we're going to teach you to draw. I mean, you'll learn to draw, but you'll especially learn, this is what I really want to teach, like you to learn these things. So squares feel more stable. Here we have combined triangles and squares that are shaped in a triangular envelope that helps direct the eye. You know, like a triangle says, look here, right? But I can utilize these things in interesting ways, right? Like I can, you know, this feels dynamic while at the same time friendly. When might I want that? Like, well, maybe somebody is in a friendly environment, but maybe there's something looming that's going to happen. You can make people feel uneasy, you know, with this sort of things. And that's why I talk about like environment is character design. Environment design is character design because you're making people emote, you know, through shapes. Here we go. Another example. This
So
will,
Ron, I have a question over the chat.
oh sure.
So Sagar is asking, are there any principles on how to use these, how to use each of these shapes? Any basic principle about it, of using these shapes?
Yeah, absolutely. If I go back here, the basic principles are understanding what you're trying to communicate. So, if you want something to feel friendly, generally circles. If you want something to feel active, dynamic, or threatening, triangles. If you want something to feel stable, or monumental, squares. And now keep in mind that these are basic shapes. Now what we do beyond that is we find my other notes page. These are all a bunch of notes I have. What do we do with the shapes? And we can't just draw just squares. Find it here. Where is my wonk page? I have a page here about wonkifying. You know what? Let's find it. Boom. Do, do, do. Where the heck is my wonky page?
There's a whole inventory over there.
Yeah, here it is.
Perfect.
Look what we can do with shapes. Here we've taken a square. It's a good example to use these things with. We have a square. Let's pull this up. Square, right? What can you do with a square? You can stretch a square. You can squash a square. See, I'm pushing the edges out here. I'm not just being like, that's a squashed square. I'm really thinking about what it would look like the sides might bow out. You can tilt a square, right? This is getting a little bit into form here, but by taking a square and making it follow a curve, and then pulling out the sides, and if you really want to, you can erase. Think about that. I gotta think about it for a second. No, I guess that's good. All right, you can tilt the square, right? Well, what might that be good for? Well, great for characters, but also great for, I don't know, geez, many things, like drawing a tree branch, you know? I can create a tree branch that twists. Make sense? See, all kinds of stuff you can do. You can, this is these are all very common principles that you'll find in many animated films. Too big on top, right? Like you got to design a television. This is very much used for Despicable Me. Too big on top, right? There's a TV on these tiny little, this is like an old-fashioned TV, I guess, but on these tiny little legs. Right? That's just a square and some circles, but it has appeal. It can be too big on bottom, right? Like it tapers upward. That gives things kind of more like a cute feeling, you know, because they feel more stable. You know, it feels sort of, I don't know, like Hamtaro or something to me. Whereas this feels unbalanced, right? So right, if you were to ask, if I were to take a poll and be like, which one looks more stable, I would bet most of you would say that one, right? So that's how we talk about like stability, you know, or if I were to say which of these shapes feels more friendly, right? Probably the circle. So you're asking about what principles of using these shapes, understanding a little bit about what the shapes, what kind of emotion they convey. You know, you want danger, put more triangles in it. You want friendlier, make things rounder. You want to mix of both, mix and match them in interesting ways. Here's a couple things. Straight versus tilt, right? Let's go back to the TV thing. This is used a lot in 2D animation background, right? Like I have to draw a couch, but I'm just going to tilt the side here. Why? Because it looks interesting. Maybe I'll put a curve there too and erase that out. that starts feeling a little more abstract, which could definitely be the feeling that you want to go for. It all depends on what movie you're making, what your art director wants. So simplification versus amplification. This is a big principle when it comes to analyzing and interpreting things. Let us return for a moment back to our page here. Simplifying versus amplifying. Right? I'm showing you this because I want you to understand that I didn't make these rules up. These rules have existed for a long time. They're just not as well known to most artists. But they are the principles that govern the best art, especially when we're talking about entertainment art. You know, look at this. Simplification versus amplification, right? This is not a great photo. It's a bad photo of a bad scan, so you'll have to bear with me a little bit. But right, this is what this fountain probably looks like. But this is the Aladdin version, right? What have they simplified? What have they amplified? They've simplified the detail here. We have a lot of little chattery details. They're like, we don't need that. Let's put some of that in there, but not nearly as much. Not nearly as many of these little designs here. They've simplified quite a bit. They've edited out quite a bit, and they've amplified other things, right? Here we have a pretty standard, like it's been a. I actually don't know how they would construct this thing, but I'm some bar metal or something that they have just, you know, it's been bent and then soldered, I guess, into place. But that's not as interesting, right? So they're like, let's amplify it. Let's use some of the design principles that we've just been talking about. You know, I said big on top, big on bottom. You could also say taper. You know, they have tapered the ends of this and made the middle thicker. I imagine that many of you already know some of these and you just employ them subconsciously. My goal would be to help you become more consciously aware of what these things are so you can incorporate them in your designs, right? Silhouette is pushed thicker at its extremity and thinner where it attaches inside and outside, no longer parallel. Here we go. Straights are removed from the contour. The interior is simplified and flows from one pattern to the next. So they have simplified things and they've amplified things. So that's a very important thing to think about. Here we go. Here's another example of a jug. Here's a normal jug. Here's an Aladdin jug, right? What do we have here? We got the tilt that we talked about. We have a little bit of too big on top, right? It tapers towards the bottom. Not as much as some designs do, some films do. So it's a it's a matter of how grounded in reality you want something to be or how designed you want it to be. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to just copy what you see. You want to interpret it. And so that is, and the question is, how do you interpret it? Well, all the things that we've been talking about so far, all these design principles, these shapes. Remember we talked a little bit about complexity and simplicity, right? We got complex, or no, sorry. We have simple, complex, simple, right? Another way you can put it is rest, visual rest, texture, rest. If you were to squint your eyes and think about this just abstractly, don't think of it as bushes or trees, then you'll start realizing like they're just shapes and edges. You know, this is just a dark shape, and this is a light shape. And then we have a little bit of texture in between. This is a light shape, this is a dark shape. All it is light over dark, light over dark, over light, over dark, over light, over dark, over light, over dark, over light, over dark, right? It's really quite that simple. And if you wanted to actually render this out more, all you would need to do is take some of these darks and make them a little bit darker. You could have some lines in there too, right? Here I'm pulling them like, okay, now I have a core shadow. Right, so now my shadow looks a little bit lighter in comparison. It gives me the impression that there's bounce light popping up here. But my point is that all that stuff is icing on the cake. This is the cake. Does that make sense?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so the notes you showed, were they made by the BizDev artist or were they given by the director for like different artists to follow?
For the Aladdin
Yeah, for
stuff,
the Aladdin one. Yeah.
yeah, those were made by um Bill Perkins. So Bill Perkins was the art director for Aladdin. As long as I'm not mistaken, I'm 99% sure I'm right on this. But anyway, Bill Perkins is the art director, and he made these notes as a document for other artists to follow. So
Like a style guide.
yeah, it's a style guide. And that's essentially what like world building is, really. You talk about world building, you're talking about researching a place or a world that you want to create, breaking it down into style guides, into things like what we've done here with Bill Perkins, what he's done with Aladdin, and then incorporating that into your drawings. You know, and so that is essentially what world building is. And when you do that, you create a world that feels visually cohesive. And that is really when it comes to art, that's really what world building is. You know, it's creating a visually cohesive, immersive world.
Thank you.
Question.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
How do I prioritize what is important for the detailing and what is I should leave out as a simplification? This is something I always get confused. on.
Sure. Yeah, I would say you're designing some sort of village, right? Like have kind of like a focal point, and then let the areas or let the detail fade where it doesn't, where it kind of gets away from your focal point. So I don't know, maybe I have some sort of large temple here of some kind, Chinese, Asian architecture. You know, so I'd focus, you know, and then maybe I want it to just be like, look really big. So these are gonna be my other houses here. They're gonna be quite small. I'm gonna have windows here look really teeny tiny. You know, some sort of big thing. I would focus the detail here. I mean, add stuff here, but then as it gets away from the focus, you know, this stuff can just be sketched, really. It doesn't even need to be like filled in all that much. So, and then the other thing I would think about is just rest and interest, right? Like you know, if I'm gonna have a lot of detail here on the roof, that'll be my area of we'll say D for detail, and this will be R for rest or T for texture. You know, and then here, I might just make this a rest area, right? How would I go about doing that? I would literally detail things up, but leave them purposely undetailed as they meet the edge. Right, so I'm just gonna work quickly, so these aren't gonna be like amazing drawings. But here let's say I've got like roof tiles. And here I want, you know, some sort of wooden beam structure. I would not connect the beams to the roof tiles, or what I would do is I would create a drop shadow. It's probably more what I would do, because this also acts as an area of rest. Right, this is what I call mass. You have three basic tools when drawing. You have line, mass, value sometimes, and form. Line's pretty simple, but there are things that govern it. Mass are shapes that are filled in. Forms are shapes converted three-dimensionally using line, sometimes also by using mass. And I guess if we want a third, we can say edge. Here we have a soft edge that tells me that this form is rounded. Here we have a hard edge that tells me that that form is angular. You can see here, I'm going to create some of these forms for my tiles. And then I'm going to use some mass. I'm going to use line to create these forms. And I'm going to use some mass to indicate or to give areas of visual rest. Right? And then I might go back in here and be like, okay, here is more detail. Here is more rest. Now let me pull up some, does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it made sense.
Just small question is that what you have done, is it a set of a rhythm which you're trying to approach it by, like start with a 2D, then go for mass, and then go for form? should I also approach it like this only, like in this rhythm, like 1, 2, 3, like a dance? How do
Yeah,
do a dance?
I would think so. Um, I would say yes. Here's kind of a classic example. Like you ask somebody to design a tree, and more often than not, they're gonna probably design like your basic tree. We'll say like they're an artist, maybe they design a more interesting tree. But there's so much more you can do. It's like, what if that tree has this huge sort of top, right? And I've designed this primarily with some flowing shapes. Now I want to think about some of these branches. I'm going to think about the negative shapes, not the positive shapes, the shapes in between when I'm drawing. I'm going to draw a bunch of triangles here. Right? How much more interesting of a tree is that? And I've done that by focusing first on shape. First, I focus on shape. Then I focus a little bit on form, right? Like there's my leaf shape roughly. Well, what's the form of this? Where's the bottom? Where's the top? Am I looking up at it? If I am, maybe I want to see the bottom, right? I have an ellipse here. But maybe I like the flow of this curve. So I'm going to do something like this. Maybe I want to repeat that. I think that looks nice, maybe I do something like that, now I have
Wow.
a more interesting tree, a tree that feels solid and structural. And on top of this, now I can add all my favorite stuff. I can add the fun texture of the bark. Um, but while doing that, I am thinking about the same things that we've been talking about, thinking about detail and rest. Let's add some detail here, the silhouette. Now let's add some visual rest by creating mass here. Now I'll add some detail, some little leaves and stuff. Now I'll add rest here. I just won't add any more detail here in the middle of the tree. I'm going to keep the detail here towards the edges. And here, where these two forms meet, I'm going to add some visual rest with a little bit of a drop shadow. Now I've got this great detail here. I like these leaves coming in. Now I'm going to add rest here. I'm going to add some visual rest on the underside of these branches. And now I'm gonna have some really fun detail here at the edges. And then I'm gonna add some rest here. I like the idea of the roots kind of popping out of the ground. And things like that, like the roots popping out of the ground, that's all stuff that maybe I really want to pull this branch down. Here I got detail, here I've got rest. I could add some detail back here if I want. Create some more detail over here. Here I got rest. So this type of thinking helps you make those decisions on where should I put it? Where does it visually fit in? I reviewed a portfolio one time, and this gal, she had some drawing ability, for sure, but she was putting detail everywhere. I mean, she had, leaves and bark, and it was just like, it's just too much. My eye can't, it doesn't understand. It starts to look like camouflage when you've got those are leaves, we'll say that's bark, over this, we'll say that's grass. But if you do this, we got leaves, we got drop shadow, we got bark, we've got just white space. Your eye can flow a lot better through that than it can through this. So, does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense.